Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Pauline. Yes.
And
Uncle Tom.
Yes. First of all, I want to let you all know that starting next week, we're doing the series on our own, not with the Israel 365, and we are going to be changing the time a bit,
yeah,
3 hours later.
yeah.
So-
I won't be able to be with you. I'll have to do it on recording because I have
okay.
meetings, which is a
Same with
shame.
me.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, it will be at 6 p.m. Israel time, 4 p.m. UK time, and then, later in the morning for the rest of you. So Faye, you won't have to get up at the crack of dawn.
Well, but I have something else at that time, so I don't know what.
Yeah.
Oh,
I may have to listen.
Yeah, I have a meeting, I'm afraid, which I can't get out of.
I may
I'm
have to listen to
sorry.
a recording. So
It's too bad.
Well, everything is recorded,
Yeah.
and if we see it's not a good time for as many people, we'll make it earlier again.
Did you
We
say
had a lot of
2
people
hours
saying it was too
later?
early.
a different day or something, yeah. I don't know.
Sondra, did you say it was 2 hours later?
It's 2.5 hours later. It will be at
2.5.
6
2.5.
It will be, in other words, will be at 6 p.m. Israel
Great.
time, which is 11 in the morning Eastern time, 10 Central time, 9 Mountain time, and 8 Pacific time.
Thank you. I just didn't hear you clearly the first time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, if we see that is, we had requests from people who were further west in the United States if we could do it a bit later. So that's why we did it. But if we see it's not as convenient, then we will just, move on to a different time, But any of you who are not getting my emails, please be sure to send me an email so that we can make sure to get you registered for the new series. I'm putting my email in the chat box. So you
Will it be half an hour or an hour?
half an hour.
Half an
Half
hour.
an hour.
Okay.
So I
All
just
right.
put my email in the chat box. Please send me your email. Make sure if you're not getting any personal emails from me, then I don't have your email. So just send me an email so I have your email, and then I can make sure we get you the new link.
Sondra, just before you start, I really wanted to thank you on behalf of Israel 365. This course has been amazing. Whether I'm following it on Facebook or following it live, it's been incredible. And I also wanted to say that Israel 365 is also continuing our courses, and they're going to be at 8 p.m. Israel time. So that's 2 hours after Sondra's course. And they're also going to be a half an hour long. So I highly encourage you to join us because even though we're going to have fewer, there's still going to be great classes. And Sondra, we're really going to miss you. And it's just been a phenomenal journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Good. So shall we start?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Today's Torah portion is Vayechi, and it is the last Torah portion of the book of Genesis. And we have here Jacob's final words before he dies. He is departing the scene and actually brings to a close not just the book of Genesis, but really the theme that we've been talking about throughout, and that is the promise that God, we traced how God is seeking someone to bring his message to the world, and ends up starting from the Torah portion of Lech Lecha, choosing Abraham, through Abraham down to what will become the nation of Israel. This is how God is going to be bringing his message forward to the world. And of course, it's all very much tied up with the promise of the land and the nation of Israel, that the land will belong, that Abraham's descendants will become a nation, the nation of Israel, and they will then come and become the possessors of the land of Israel. And all of that, of course, is so tied up with the connection with God and with bringing forth God's message. So what we're doing in this Torah portion is kind of bringing that all full circle. There's a closure going on here, and that's what I'd like to reflect. So first of all, Jacob assembles. First, he asks Joseph to come to him, Joseph with his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And then afterwards, he assembles all of his sons. So I want to take a look at both of these meetings. So first of all, what does Jacob say to Joseph in chapter 48, verse 3. Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai, that's one of the names of God, okay? El Shaddai appeared to me in Luz. Luz, if you remember, is a synonym for Bethel, okay? El Shaddai appeared to me in Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me. And he said to me, one second. And he said to me, I will make you fertile and numerous. I will make you a community of people. I will give this land to your children to come for an everlasting possession. He's referring back to when was he in Luz, Jacob? When was he in Beit El? When he left his father's house for the first time, fleeing from his brother Esau. It is that wonderful dream of the ladder with the angels going up and down the ladder. And it is then that God appeared to him. So let's just take a quick look at what God says to him there. And that's chapter 28, verses 13. And the Lord was standing beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. The ground on which you are lying, I will give to you and your children. Your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. So we can see that what he's talking about now, then he adds this, of course, verse 15, about how he will protect him and return him to the land. He says, now this is first said to Jacob as he's leaving Canaan, going east. Later on, he will leave Canaan, of course, and go west to Egypt. But here he's going east or north, and he says, remember, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So Jacob here, in speaking to Joseph, refers back to this promise of God. And he talks about he mentions this idea of becoming very numerous, becoming a nation that's very numerous, and the fact that this land will be his to his children as an everlasting possession. The next thing he says, he talks about the two children, Ephraim and Manasseh. And Jacob says that those two children will be to him as if they were his own children. And what he is essentially saying here is that Joseph will get a double portion. And we know that is actually what happens in the land of Israel. Whereas instead of there being a tribe of Joseph, like there's a tribe of Reuben, a tribe of Gad, and a tribe of Judah, and all the rest, there will be two tribes that are of the family of Joseph, a tribe of Manasseh and a tribe of Ephraim. So when he talks to Joseph and saying the two children will be like his own children, what he's saying is that he will have a double portion. Double portion, by the way, is a classic sign of firstborn. And we saw this throughout the book of Genesis, where the firstborns are rarely the real firstborns, okay? The firstborn is the son that inherits the promise that God has given to the father. And in every generation, Isaac, who's the younger son, inherits rather than Ishmael. Jacob, who is younger than Esau, inherits rather than Esau. And when it comes to the children of Jacob, the children of Israel, they all inherit, and yet there's still a firstborn. And that firstborn, in this sense, is Joseph, who is one of the youngest in the family. And he, of course, is that son who was always Jacob's favorite. He then goes on to talk about in verse 7, he says, when I was returning from Padan, which is Aram, Rachel died to my sorrow while I was journeying to the land of Canaan, when still some distance short of Ephrat. I buried her there on the road to Ephrat, now Bethlehem. It's very interesting, by the way, in how you read this verse. Does this mean that he buried Rachel in Bethlehem? It's clear that Ephrat and Bethlehem are the same. They're synonym to another. And in fact, the modern Jewish community of Ephrat today gets its name from the fact that it is adjacent to Bethlehem. In fact, my son has a home in the northern edge of Ephrat. And when you go and stand on the porch just outside the synagogue there, you are literally looking at Bethlehem, just there below you. And that's, of course, how Ephrat got its name. But it isn't clear if he buried her in or close to Bethlehem, or he merely buried her along the road to Bethlehem. And there's actually, from the book of Samuel, you are able to think that perhaps she's buried north of Jerusalem, not south of Jerusalem. But that is a whole different discussion, and we're not going to get into that today, but I'm just going to kind of pique your curiosity in that one. Anyone who wants to know what all that is about, just send me an email and I will explain. Anyway, he does explain the fact that he could not bury her in Hebron. He had to, because she died on the way, and therefore he buried her on her own somewhere else. Okay. And then he talks about, again, at the end of his talk to Joseph, in between, he's giving a blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh. I'm not going to go into that. But at the very end of the chapter, his final words to Joseph are as follows. He says, then Israel said to Joseph, verse 21 and 22, I am about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. Very much reminiscent of God's promise to Jacob that we just quoted from the ladder to heaven. At the beginning of Genesis, and then then Jacob continues here, and now I give you one portion more than your brothers, which I wrested from the Amorites with my sword and bow. One portion more. Now the actual is it's a double meaning here, because in Hebrew it doesn't say one portion, it says the word Shechem, okay? Shechem or Shechem, one shoulder more. The meaning here is clearly, I'm giving you an extra portion, and that reflects what we just said about giving to Ephraim and Manasseh as two separate tribes to the children of Joseph. But it's also ironic because the word Shechem or Shechem, it does mean shoulder, but it's also the name of a city, a very prominent city in the land of Israel, which will indeed be part of the territory of Joseph. And in fact, it will become a major, it is, you know, even today, a major city in Israel. And Shechem, unfortunately, today is in the hands of the Palestinian Authority. But biblically speaking, when the kingdom split later on, after the death of Solomon, and the two kingdoms split to the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom, it is a king from Ephraim, from the tribe of Ephraim, Jeroboam, who becomes king. He is crowned in Shechem, and the first capital is in Shechem as well. Later on, it moves to Tirzah. After that, it is Ahab who builds a whole new capital, which is called Samaria, and that is the place that we refer to today as Sebastia, which is very close to the community of Shavei Shomron. But that's, you know, just a bit of extra history. But it is interesting that Shechem, in many ways, then represents the center city of the children of Joseph. And in fact, Joseph is buried there in Shechem. Okay, that we learn about another time. Okay, so that's the general message that Jacob is giving to Joseph. After this, he gathers all the children together and to give them their blessings. But then after he blesses each one individually, the blessings are a combination of describing something about their character and at the same time giving a certain prophetic word in many cases. Then we have the very end of chapter 49. We have a very specific request or actual commandment that Jacob makes to his sons, to all of his sons. Then he instructed them saying, I am about to be gathered to my kin, which is a way of saying he's about to die. Bury me with my fathers in the cave which is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. the cave which is in the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, in the land of Canaan, the field that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it, bought from the Hittites. Jacob finished his instructions to his sons. He drew his feet into the bed. Breathing his last, he was gathered to his people. So first of all, I think it's very interesting, and I think we learn a great deal with this instruction to all his sons, why it was so important for Jacob to give a separate instruction privately, or separate message privately to Joseph first. So first of all, he talks about here in his instruction to all the sons, he's stressing how important it is that he be buried in Hebron, that he return to the land of his forefathers and be buried in the very same place of his forefathers. And this in many ways reflects the promise that God promises to Jacob, and that Jacob then repeats to Joseph. The message being that God will be with me as I leave the land of Israel, and he will bring me back to the land, whether me or my children. And I think this is a very important message that has to be given to Joseph separately than to the sons of the other sons, because Joseph is a king. And we see later on, Joseph is the one who arranges for all of them to leave Egypt to go and bury Jacob in Hebron. Joseph, though, being second to the king, it's very difficult. It's not a normal thing for a king to leave, not on a state mission, but on a private mission to bury his father in another land. And so I think that the fact that he repeated this promise to Joseph separately, the promise that God made to him and the importance of the return to the land in connection with the land, was something that Joseph needed to understand, because he was going to be jeopardizing his position in a way his brothers would not, in order to leave Egypt and go and accompany Jacob to burial. Okay. Next, he talks about, what does he tell Joseph? He says, Joseph, he'll have a double portion. Well, clearly, he's not going to want to tell this to Joseph in front of all of his brothers. There's been enough jealousy in this family. The family has just come together. They have made peace with one another. And yet, Jacob retains this idea of Joseph as a firstborn, or Joseph as a favorite. And yet, Jacob has learned his lesson, and he's not going to rub that in his other sons' faces. He's going to say that privately to Joseph. And thirdly is the issue of the burial of Rachel. Because here, when Jacob tells his sons that he wants to be buried in Hebron, he is saying, this is where Abraham buried his wife Sarah, where Isaac buried his wife Rebekah, and where I buried Leah. I want to be buried next to Leah. And before he says that to everybody, he has to be able to say to Joseph privately, I would have wanted to be buried with Rachel, but it didn't happen. It wasn't possible, because she died too early and I couldn't get there. I had to bury her separately. And so he had to give that explanation to Joseph, so that Joseph could understand and realize that Rachel indeed was his beloved wife. But again, this was not something he was going to say to Joseph in front of all the other sons. Okay. Now, if you'll notice, as we read this instruction, it would have been so simple if Jacob would have just said, I need you to take me to Hebron, to the family burial spot in Machpelah, and bury me there next to my wife Leah. Why did we have to have all the detail? Now, maybe he wants to emphasize, why is this the family burial spot? So then he would have said, like he does, this is where my, Abraham and Sarah are buried, and this is where Isaac and Rebekah are buried, this is where Leah are buried. Okay, fine. But why do we have to say, not once, but 3 different times in the space of 2 verses, that this was a field and a cave that was purchased from Ephron the Hittite? We learn that in verse 29. We learn it twice in verse 30, and we learn it again in verse 32. Why? And I think here it really repeats something that we saw also back in Chai Sarah, when Abraham first bought this cave and this field from Ephron the Hittite. And we saw how the back and forth negotiations were so detailed. And you have to ask yourself, why is it that the Bible tells us all of this? Why is it so important? And then at the very end of the negotiation, okay, it's very unusual kind of language, extremely detailed. And I'm reading now from chapter 23, verse 17. So Ephron's land in Machpelah near Mamre, the field with its cave and all the trees anywhere within the confines of the field, passed to Abraham as his possession in the presence of the Hittites, of all who entered the gate of his town. And then Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Hebron, now facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave passed from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site. Again, this constant repeat of the fact of that they bought it from the Hittites. Well, there's a wonderful, wonderful midrash, and I know many of you have heard this from me before, a wonderful midrash that our sages tell, that there are three places that are written in the Bible, mentioned in the Bible, that God, that someone in the Bible purchased the land with real money. And those three places are, the first one is here, the Hebron Machpelah cave, which Abraham purchased from the Hittites. The second one is a field in Shechem that Jacob purchases when he comes back from Haran. And the third is the threshing floor, which David purchases in the book of Samuel, and where is the Temple Mount today, and where Solomon will build the first temple. And then our sages go on to say as follows: why are these three places? Why is it so important to mention the actual negotiations and the sale of these places? And the answer they give is because when the nations of the world will come and dispute the Jewish claim to the land of Israel, we will be able to open the Bible and point to these three places and say these places were purchased. And I've always found this so ironic and so meaningful, that what are these three places? Shechem, okay, that's where Jacob purchased the field. We just talked about how central Shechem has been to our biblical history. And yet Shechem is in the heart of Samaria. It's the largest city in Samaria, and today is in the hands of the Palestinian Authority. Joseph's tomb is in Shechem. It is a little enclave that's officially still under Israeli control, but surrounded by Palestinian Authority. It is almost impossible to get to. Jerusalem, and particularly the Temple Mount, which is the area that David bought, the most controversial area in the entire Middle East. Every time Israel wants to exercise some sort of authority, we have all these, not just the Palestinians, but all these other Arab countries going wild because they feel this is Al-Aqsa, this is theirs, this is not ours, and they deny that there ever even was a Solomon's temple there. And of course, Hebron, which is the place we're talking about here with the Machpelah cave. And this, of course, has always been a city of great controversy. Of course, it is a place where Jews live today, and Jews do come, thank God, and pray and visit and study in the huge Herodian structure that was built on top of the Machpelah cave. But again, it is a place of great controversy. And I ask you, do you really believe if we were today to go before the United Nations, if we were to go before the international press and say, guys, you got it all wrong, and open the Bible and start reading to them from the verses, do you really think it would make a difference if we showed them the title deeds to these places that are mentioned in the Bible? Well, of course not. And it was only, I don't know, I've been working with Christians now for close to 23 years. And it is only after I started working with Christians that I started to say, hey, wait a second. Maybe those nations of the world that our sages are talking about, maybe we're talking about Christians. Maybe we're talking about people of the nations who read the Bible, because it is only people like that who have that understanding. And I think there's something here about this detail that goes back and enables me to talk to people like you and for you to get it. Because you see, we are talking about the truth, and we're talking about the place that indeed is the heart and soul of the Jewish possession and connectedness to the land of Israel. I just want to end today with the final words of Joseph. In chapter 50, verses 24 to 25, he says as follows. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die. God will surely remember you. And I want to tell you that here, the word that he uses, pakod yifkod, from the word pakod, which also means appoint, it also means remember, okay? And it means appoint. It has different meanings, but in this case, it means remember. God will remember you and bring you up from this land to the land that he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, when God has taken notice of, when God remembers you, you shall carry up my bones from here. And so basically what Joseph does in these last words to his brothers is, first of all, pass along that promise that Jacob said to him in that private conversation before he gathered the brothers. He passes on that promise that God makes, I will bring you back. I will be with you and I will bring you back. And he, of course, he takes the leadership, and we see Joseph has already stepped into the leadership, but he is telling them something that they must pass on to future generations. And that is this promise: God will remember you. And we look forward and we look into the book of Exodus, chapter 4. Moses coming to the nation of Israel in the midst of their enslavement. And Moses said to them as follows. Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites. Aaron repeated all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and he performed the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed when they heard that the Lord had remembered the Israelites, that he had seen their plight. They bowed low in homage. And the word used here for remember is the same word, pakod, ki pakad Hashem. And it's as if that Moses used those code words, that the children of Israel taking Joseph's words, God will again remember you, pakod yifkad, and passing them down. One day, someone will come and tell you, God has remembered you. Hashem pakad, God has remembered you, and that will enable them to believe and to be redeemed. And of course, in our next series through the book of Exodus, we will be discussing the redemption of Israel. We have still a few more minutes. If anybody has a few questions or comments that they would like to make, happy to hear from you.
Sondra, I'd just like to thank you so much. It's really, really interesting. And I'm glad that we're continuing. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. Wonderful. Wonderful. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Again, we'll be sending a new link. Those of you who do not have, are not getting personal emails from me, please send me an email to Sondra, Sondra, at CFOIC.com. And I will be sure to send you the registration so that you can get the new link. And of course, pass this on. I put my email in the chat, so you should be able to see that on top, Sondra at CFOIC.com. Our courses will be for free, always. We will never, ever charge money for our Bible teaching. So you can sign on and encourage your friends to sign on, and that would be great.
Thank you so much, Sondra.
Thank you.
Diane, I appreciate you so much.
Happy New Year, Sondra. Thank
Happy
you.
New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you all.
The teaching has been rich. Thank you.
To see you in Toronto via Zoom.
Yes,
In
we'll
another
do that soon.
Yes.
See
Okay.
you soon, Sondra. Be
Bye-bye.
blessed.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. God bless.
Bye.
Shalom.
Hi, Sandra.